Another draft season has come and gone. The Blue Jackets got their guy at 4th overall, but who else did they pick up in the draft? We're talking about all of the draft picks from the Blue Jackets in today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. You can also find us on SiriusXM. Just go to the SXM app and type in Locked On Blue Jackets. You can find us there. We talked earlier today about the RFAs, the free agency coming today, but now we're going to talk about the draft, which happened this weekend. And again, I've got a lot to talk about, so let's just get it rolling. Although before I do that, I do need to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Playoffs are over, so the sports aren't sporting anymore. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And we'll get started with the Blue Jackets' first-round pick, which they had their guy that they liked. If he wasn't available, the pick was going somewhere else. He was available. They picked him. I really like this pick, and I talked a little bit in the immediate aftermath about how much I like this pick. This was my guy basically since I started doing my draft prep, and I was like, okay, if the Blue Jackets don't get Celebrini, this feels like the guy for me. He is kind of Fantilli-esque, but not. They're different enough that I don't feel like they have exactly the same player. But 6'3" center, has that kind of edge to his game, is a power forward. He gives me Pierre-Luc Dubois vibes, but in a good way. So that's not me saying, and like that's not like in a derogatory fashion. That's very much like what I thought Pierre-Luc Dubois was going to be is what I'm getting the same vibe of from Cayden Lindstrom. So like if he hits, that's going to be great. And I feel better about Lindstrom hitting than Dubois, quite frankly. I really love this pick. Again, I don't need to talk about it in any super great detail, because if you want to learn more about him, you can go to the draft profile that I did with Tony Ferrari, or you can go to the short clip that's available on YouTube and down in the audio feed on the podcast version as well, where I talk about, why this pick was a win, what's next for the Blue Jackets, things like that. There's a lot of conversation about, was Cayden Lindstrom the best player available for the Blue Jackets? And, I think there are some people that have said, oh, we should have gone with Demidov. And, I wouldn't have been mad if they had picked Demidov. I think he's going to be a phenomenal talent, and I think he's going to burn every team that passed on him in the draft, and also every other team. But the Blue Jackets have a lot of wingers. I think addressing the need at center took priority for this team, and I don't think that's a bad thing. The Blue Jackets probably need a goal-scoring winger, but not at the expense of drafting potentially, having the chance to have a 1-2 punch down the middle of Fantilli and Lindstrom for the next 10 to 15 years is just so enticing, and that's why, I'm more than happy with them taking Lindstrom. I was super interested to hear that if he wasn't available, they were thinking of moving the pick. There was conversations with Carolina about a trade surrounding Martin Necas for the 4th overall pick. I assume other stuff in there. Like if it had been straight up the 4th overall for Martin Necas, I would have probably flown to Columbus and fought Don Waddell in the streets. But something else that I thought was interesting is the Chicago Blackhawks offered the Blue Jackets their first round pick next year, unprotected. So a potential lottery pick there, and another pick that they didn't determine, which again, I would like to know, was that another first round pick? Was that a second round pick? Was it a 4th round pick? The idea of having a potentially 2 lottery picks next season is really enticing, but the Blue Jackets really liked Lindstrom. They really, really did. And I think I'm not mad on them passing on that deal because, again, we don't know what the Blackhawks might be good this season. Unlikely, but they might be, and I don't think that what'll happen, they'll do what the Florida Panthers did, which they traded their first round pick, did not lottery protect it, were garbage first 3/4 of the season, and then crawled into the playoffs and made the Stanley Cup final. So their unprotected first round pick that went to Montreal ended up being, I think, 31st overall, which they then used to draft Logan Mailloux, which is a whole other thing. But that being said, Cayden Lindstrom was Columbus's guy. They got their guy, and I feel pretty good about it. Like I said, I wouldn't have hated if the pick was Demidov, but I really, really like Lindstrom as a player. He was a guy that, again, since I started my draft prep in like early to mid-January, when I finally gave up the hope that the Blue Jackets might crawl into the playoffs and do something, or at least not finish with that potential lottery pick, I was like, okay, Lindstrom, that's the guy that I think the Blue Jackets should focus on. And they did, and they got the guy. So you love to see it. I'm really happy with this pick. I'm not worried about the back injury at all. Players get injured. Medicine has advanced massively, even over the past 5 years. I do not think this is going to be another Ryan Murray. I really genuinely don't. And if you want to bookmark this and come back and dunk on me in 5 seasons, fine. But I genuinely don't think that this is another Ryan Murray situation. As long as Cayden Lindstrom does not wear the number 27 on the Blue Jackets, I think we are just fine. But who else did they take in this draft? We're going to talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, though, I've got to tell you about FanDuel. Not game time, as the initial overlay said. FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But the hockey is gone. It's not gone forever, but it's done for the summer. So there are no games. The sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel is going to let me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app. I can dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. The MLB is playing right now, so it's not like there's zero sports. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right, there is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Even when it's your second episode of the day, it's fine. We talked about the draft. We talked about Cayden Lindstrom. Was he the best player available? No. Was he the best player for the Blue Jackets? Yes. And now we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the draft picks. And they all had something in common, which is unusual for a Blue Jackets draft, quite frankly. And I think this was the difference between a Kekalainen draft and a Waddell draft. They were all big. The mantra of Blue Jackets drafting the last little while has been draft skill, figure the rest out. The mantra this season seems to have been draft size, figure the rest out. But Don Waddell said something really interesting in the post-draft press conference that I thought was worth kind of talking a little bit about, which is, okay, they're all big, but he drafted them all because they are great skaters. And again, from the little bit of scouting chatter that I have kind of had since the draft, obviously, it's still very early days, but that seems to be true. All of these guys are very good skaters, and that's important in this day and age. If you are big but you can't skate, you are basically useless, which I think is interesting that Waddell kind of pointed out specifically that they went after good skaters as opposed to good something else. I think Kent Johnson is kind of the biggest example of this. Kent Johnson is elite at so many things. His skating is only okay, and I think his skating has come on, a lot in the past couple of seasons. But when he was drafted, his skating was definitely the thing that he needed to work on the most. And skating, I feel like, is something that you can quote unquote overcome in a way. Dmitry Voronkov, for example, is never going to be the prettiest skater in the world. He's never going to be the best skater in the world, but he has kind of made his game work despite the average or worse skating. If you start from a base of having a good skater, lots of other things you can figure out along the way. So I like that they went after specifically skaters. I don't there were some guys left on the board that I was fan of. I liked Andrew Basha for the 36th overall pick. Luke Misa somehow dropped all the way to the 6th or 7th round. He was a guy that I had looked at a lot as small energy guy, but again, the Blue Jackets have a lot of those guys. James Malatesta, Luca Del Bellbaluz is not smaller, but he kind of fits that same archetype. Gavin Brindley, for example. Kent Johnson is, again, not small, but is smaller. I think he's like 6'1" officially or something, so not little, but smaller, So, they left some guys out there that I personally would have taken, but at the end of the day, they probably know more than I do. I like the Blue Jackets scouting department a lot. Vili Siren, the head of scouting, I think is one of the better heads of scouting in the game right now. And Jarmo Kekalainen was involved in the draft and in the scouting for the Blue Jackets because he's still getting paid by them, or he was as of yesterday. I think his contract ended or ends 1st of July, so he's no longer employed by the Blue Jackets, but he did some work at the draft with them. He was at the Combine offering his insight, and Jarmo Kekalainen, his strength was always drafting. So, it's not like it was a complete departure from everything. They had a lot of the same guys there, but I think Waddell has kind of added a little bit of insight to the Blue Jackets drafting strategy, which I think is interesting. So they had 2 guys in the second round. They decided to keep the second round pick that they originally sent to the Flyers. So next year's second round pick will belong to the Philadelphia Flyers. And I think they're betting on the fact that it will be higher than 36th overall. If the Blue Jackets are in a lottery position again next year, this people are going to be mad about it. So I think they're really betting on the fact that it's going to be significantly higher than 36th overall, maybe even like up in the 50s, But with this pick, they selected Charlie Elick, who is a big defenseman, comes out of the Brandon Wheat Kings, and has some snarl in his game. And I know there's one of my wonderful everydayers is like drink every time Jay talks about a player having snarl, but Charlie Elick definitely has it. He is again big, pretty solid skater. Don't hate this pick. Again, there was a lot of conversation about guys that I would probably have picked at 36th, but I don't hate this pick. He's big. He is fast, which again for a bigger guy is always important, and he loves to throw the body around, which again is not something I necessarily would have taken with a second round pick. But if he kind of finishes growing into that frame, I like it a lot. He's going to have to work on his positioning. He's going to have to learn that you don't always have to make the big hit, but physicality is still a part of this game, and he's probably 2 or 3 years away from being an NHL option, and it'll be interesting to see how his game develops, and probably I would like him to take a little bit of that physicality out of it and add a little bit of a little bit more defense and potentially a little bit more offense. He had 27 points in 65 games for the Brandon Wheat Kings, had 3 assists in 7 games for Team Canada at the IIHF U18 World Championship in Finland this season. He's not a game breaker, but he's almost definitely an NHL defenseman, which for a second round draft pick, if he makes it, if he's like a middle to bottom pair defenseman, I feel okay about that. Like, I think his ceiling is probably a number 4. But again, 36th overall, if you get a 4th defenseman out of that, like, I feel fine about that. Colton Parayko is kind of his NHL comparable. Definitely has fallen off in recent years, but if they get a Colton Parayko, he's had, almost a decade-long NHL career. And if you get that from Elick, I like that a lot, if I'm being honest. Their second round pick was kind of a surprise in that they picked a goalie, which was not a surprise. The surprise was who it was, because I did not really have Evan Gardner on my radar. And again, I am not a professional scout in any means. I know just enough to make me dangerous. He was ranked 7th among North American goalies by NHL Central Scouting. He ended up taking the starting role with the Saskatoon Blades. Ended up being the starter for the rest of the season. Was one of the most reliable guys in the league. Recorded a .918 save percentage from September to the middle of November, and is not the highest ranked prospect, but he does have good fundamentals. Again, good starter. Ended up taking the starting role. Is a good skater, excuse me, not a good starter. Ended up taking the starting role for the Blades in the playoffs, and took them to the Eastern Conference Final, where they lost to the Moose Jaw Warriors, who ended up making the Memorial Cup. So, you can't really... I don't know how much you can fault him for that. He's mobile in the crease. He's got good movement. He's smaller as a goalie. He keeps being listed as 6 foot, 6 foot even, but he's 6'1.5", 6'2". So, like, right in that sweet spot for goalie size, between 6'2" and 6'4", I think is really where that sweet spot is. Any taller and you start, opening up 2 big gaps. Any smaller and you really have trouble kind of filling the net, so to speak. Rebound control needs work. He sometimes over adjusts, which both of these things are pretty common in young goalies, and is just something that, more reps will figure that out. Doesn't necessarily have future starting goalie potential, but if he becomes a serviceable NHL backup, again, I feel like that's pretty good. And goalies are voodoo anyway, is the thing. Goalies are mysterious and wizardry and magical, and no one understands them. Not even goalie experts will understand 100% of goalies, So you really are just kind of... I feel like every time you draft a goalie, you're kind of taking a risk. You're kind of just throwing a dart. Gardner is a fine pick for a goalie. I really liked Ryerson Linders, who ended up going all the way in the 7th round. But again, goalies, they make no sense. Why not take a flyer on a guy like Gardner, who shows flashes of potential? We're going to take another quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about the 3rd, 4th, and 6th round picks of the Blue Jackets in this entry-level draft. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets, talking all things draft. We've talked about Cayden Lindstrom, we've talked about Charlie Elick, we've talked about Evan Gardner, and now we're going to talk about the 3rd round selection of the Blue Jackets, who is defenseman Luca Marrelli. And the Blue Jackets, for the 3rd draft in a row, have drafted a player named Luca. Last year they had Luca Pinelli. The year before that they had Luca Del Bel Belouz. Luca Marrelli is a right shot defenseman for the Oshawa Generals. Was selected in the 3rd round, 86th overall. Again, has size, is I believe 6'3", which again follows the pattern. Is a offensive defenseman, big guy. Used on the power play a lot for the Oshawa Generals. Had 18 power play assists on the season, which is pretty good. Above average skater. Likes to limit time and space. He's pretty mobile. Could be a little bit more physical. But for a 3rd round pick, I feel pretty good about it. Brock Otten of McKean's Hockey, who we had on the show to talk about some defensemen earlier on, I believe in late March. Has a little bit of everything, lacks a standout quality that sets him apart, but says that his hockey IQ is among the best of any CHL defender this season. And Craig Button, who is the director of scouting for TSN, agrees with that. Has excellent hockey sense, knows exactly who he is. Again, definitely a project. Is probably going to be almost definitely, going to be back with the Generals this season. They are expected to be an excellent team, dominate the Eastern Conference. They won the Eastern Conference, lost in the OHL finals to London Knights, which again, I feel like if you lose to the London Knights, you can't really criticize that, he is he's an interesting guy. Again, I think he's going to be a project. I'm not expecting to see him anytime soon, but for a third round pick, I like this pick a lot. And that's kind of the end of the players that I have any kind of like layman's knowledge about. Because by the you get to the end of the third round, I'm like, okay, like 96 or 98 or whatever it is, prospects have gone. Now we're getting into the weeds for someone like me who again only knows enough about prospects to make them dangerous. The Blue Jackets' fourth round pick is Tanner Hendricks, who is 17-year-old American defenseman, 6'4". Spent this season with the Lincoln Stars of the USHL, had 9 assists in 59 games. Will be going to St. Cloud State University in the 25-26 season. So I expect to see him back with the Lincoln Stars of the USHL. The USHL is, again, I think a really fun league to draft from. It's really kind of growing and going from strength to strength every single year. For a fourth round pick, you're always going to you have your guys that you liked. I will say he was ranked 96th overall by Craig Button, was ranked 151st by FC Hockey, ended up going 101st overall to the Blue Jackets. It's a fine pick. He's big. He's again got good skating. He's not super offensively minded, but he has got those kind of puck moving skills. He can draw pressure. He can use those modern breakout principles that we're starting to see more and more now, which is always a good sign in a defenseman. I feel like you want to be able to break the puck out of the zone. Whether anything happens once it gets into the offensive zone, I feel like is not necessarily your problem. But if you can take it out of the zone and are not a liability, that feels pretty good to me. This guy is maybe 5 years away from the NHL, if at all. You know, if you get a bottom pairing guy out of the fourth round, sure, why not? You know, he might be one of those guys that has a breakout, and you know, some guys that in their D+1 years, they just take off out of nowhere. He's on the younger side as well, has a July birthday, so won't turn 18 until next month. So, again, is definitely a guy that is still growing into himself, is still developing as a player, and we'll see. We'll check in on him probably through the season, see how he's developing. The final pick for the Blue Jackets in this draft is again another defenseman, because they really went high on the defenseman this year. Luke Ashton, who is committed to Minnesota State University in the NCAA, spent the last 3 seasons with the BCHL, was with the Langley Rivermen this season, had 36 points in 53 games, was with the Vernon Vipers for the 2 years before that. The BCHL, again, I feel like is an underrated league. Ashton, another big boy, is 6'7". He's an overager as well. But again, with the 6th round, it is what it is. If you get an NHL player out of a 6th round pick, then you're playing with house money, you know? Is from North Vancouver, I believe is familiar with both Lindstrom and I want to say Elick. But again, very, very far off. If he grows into himself, then maybe we'll see that. But he is right now, I think, is just a big guy that is going to throw his body around. Scored in the BCHL. I'm interested to see what happens in the NCAA. He will be, like I said, going to Minnesota State University, not the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota State University, which is slightly different and not as big of a deal. But he we'll see. Again, I don't know a ton about this guy, because once you start getting into guys that are ranked 100 or more, I'm like, have I heard of this guy? No, I don't think I have. But we'll kind of, as the week progresses, we'll try and get prospect experts in to talk about, especially guys like Hendricks, guys like Ashton, guys like Luca Marrelli as well. We'll talk about all of those guys kind of in a little bit more detail with someone who knows much more than I do. But just to kind of give you guys an overview, I like this draft fine. I don't think it's as good as last year's draft where they made out like literal bandits, but they got some good value there. They got their guy at 4th overall. They picked up a goalie with potential. Luca Marrelli, I think, is a really intriguing piece to take in the 4th round. Or the 3rd round, excuse me. Lots of pieces here. No game breakers necessarily, barring Cayden Lindstrom, but some good supplemental pieces to the prospect pool. As the prospect pool kind of guys continue to graduate out of it, they've added some more guys back in, which are kind of intriguing and exciting. So that's kind of what I've got for today. We might have one more episode up today, depending on if the Blue Jackets do anything gigantic at free agency, which I'm not expecting. But if not, we'll talk about free agency tomorrow. And tomorrow we're also talking to James Tubb, who is a reporter who covers the Medicine Hat Tigers. We're going to talk to him in detail about Cayden Lindstrom, what kind of player he is, what we can expect from him, all that good stuff. So that's going to be coming tomorrow. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day, or your second listen of the day, even, because it's the second episode. But I appreciate you either way. You can find us anywhere you like on podcasts. We're on YouTube. We're on SiriusXM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticism, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.